Chris, I'm originally from here, from Leeds. That song we just sung, that means a lot to me. Waymaker, miracle worker. That's it's part of my story. So I grew up here in Leeds. I suffered a lot with ADHD as a child. It was hard to get a full diagnosis on me. I fell into a lot of categories apart from one. And I think that's kind of where my thing started with, I don't know, I'd say like my behavioural problems kind of went out of the window. I didn't behave as a normal child would. I was always on the trail of destruction. I used to get into trouble quite a lot. I've got like a colourful past. I think that started off kind of my thing with addiction, the adrenaline and stuff like that. I chased the adrenaline. I loved getting chased for things that I was doing when I was a kid, like being naughty. And it kind of started, even from a young age, before I even started in addiction, I'd be shoplifting, and I would do it just like, I didn't care if I got caught or I didn't. It was kind of that buzz of being chased. If I got chased, it was even better. Like, I don't know, it was the buzz of it really. And I speak about that because I really relate it to like the substance misuse and everything like that. It's the chasing to be different, to feeling different to how I was, and I never really felt kind of normal as a child. I was always getting up to different stuff and hanging about with people older than me, and that's part of my story. Me hanging about with older people. It kind of took me down a path that I when I look back now, that's part of what took me down the path. I'll speak a little bit about school. So when I was in school, I never really got on. I couldn't concentrate because of the ADHD that I suffered from. A lot of it, some of it's a blur, but I remember just being destructive in school, not being told kind of what to do by the teachers or anything like that. And my substance misuse started off really early. So it started off at the age of 13, where I was leaving primary school and I was going smoking weed with older lads. And I think when I look back, it's kind of a bit of a gateway drug. But I was one of them kids, if you told me to do something, I would go and do it. I never looked at the consequences of things and how that might affect others. Today that's definitely something that I do. And that started me off on a cycle. So I'd hang around with lads who was a couple of years older than me. I'd gone into from using substances what might not, seem as much to some people. It's just a little bit of weed, and then I'd started taking ecstasy. By the time I was 15, I was on class A's. I was knocking around with. I was 15 years old. I was knocking around with people who was 10 years older than me at that point. So they was like in the 20s, 25. And that really took me down a path because, like I say, I was one of them kids who'd always ask, what's that? I want some more, it'd be kind of like, I didn't realise the dangers of anything that I'll get myself into, and I relate that with my, the stuff that I did. I didn't realise the dangers, what I was doing. I remember here, so I'm originally from Seacroft here in Leeds, born and bred, and then I moved over where you all know Asda down at the bottom of the road. I moved to a little estate called Sutton's, opposite there. Now I lived on a hill, and this is a main road here, and I remember when I was younger, like rolling, I just remember rolling like a tyre down the hill and watching a car hit it, and it's like, the dangers of that, but that stuff to me back then, I found it really funny, which is quite disturbing really. But I kind of, so my mum tried to get me all the help, that she could, but because I couldn't get a full diagnosis, it was really hard. I think even from being younger to being older, it must have been hard for my mum for the stuff that I was doing. And at the age of 15, I ended up in prison because I was going out, I was stealing cars. By this time, I had an addiction, classes, which was heroin. I was taking at the time, which I'd been given by these older guys. And I've carried on taking that. So I've kind of gone through, I've gone through that cycle of taking that stuff, and I ended up in prison. So some of these guys got locked up, and then it wasn't long after because I was kind of relying on them for them to take me out to get into this crime or to do this crime. You know, I'd run in shops, I'd grab stuff and throw it back at cars and I'd be off. You know, I kind of got, they guided me, I kind of got guided into crime and stuff like that. You know, the shoplifting and stuff like that was quite easy. I'd just go in and I'd pick something up and I'd be off with it. But, you know, I'll get into more serious crime. You know, where I was kind of driving off with cars full of petrol. I was running into these shops and filling the car up and driving off. So yeah, I think things kind of got worse and worse as it went on. So that cycle, I kind of got stuck in that for 21 years. Once I had a taste of prison when I was 15, it didn't really faze me. If anything, from the life that I'd come from on the streets, it was more of a respite. And I kind of had a bit of structure in there. But I'd come back out and I'd get back into these same cycles, hang around with the same people. I'd always been used to being hanging around with older people. And I suppose my addiction by then, it kind of, I don't know, the drugs seemed to calm me down. I think that's what it was. You know, I suffered with this ADHD and, you know, I'd smoke weed and it made me feel different. It didn't make me feel like that anymore. You know, my head racing and stuff like that. And you know, my head still races today, but it's kind of, I use it positively instead. So yeah, that cycle kind of went on for 21 years. You know, I've been in and out of prison for quite all them years. You know, I don't think there was a year that I had out. Some long sentences, some short sentences. You know, but things just seemed to like kind of get worse for me. I was going more and more into the addiction. I'd swap my addictions. I'd go from the class A's to alcohol, you know, I'd just swap my addictions all the time and think that I could manage them. And actually, I couldn't manage, you know, none of it. It always landed me back in the same place, which was a prison cell. But through all of that, there's like a lot of stuff that ended up happening, you know. Family, the relationship breaks down within my family. You know, they give me chance after chance. I tell people when I was in prison that I wanted to change, and I actually believed that I could change. It wasn't that I was trying to lie and say, you know, that I had this big thing of that I'd get back out and I would have to go use the substances again. Because in my head I wanted that change, but I could just never change. I'd get back out and I'd get stuck on that same loop and in the same cycles. And I think like last time I went to prison, I was lost and I was broken. And I asked God to come into my life in one of my darkest places. You know, I was in the prison cell. I'd lost everything. For the last time, you know, my family, they didn't want to know me. Nobody wanted to know me. I just felt like I was all alone. The only people I had around me was people who was in the wing. There was in the same things that I was, you know, different crimes. But I noticed that a lot of it was down to substance misuse, why I was in the prison. And for me, being younger, I always found that I never got that. I was trying to get this help, but it was never happening. And this time when I went into myself at last time, I was lost, I was broken, and I did ask, I got down on my hands and knees and prayed for God to come into my life. And I asked, my words was, God, if you know a way, please show me a new path. You know, I promise I will never go back to that life, and you know, I'll never cause harm or stuff to people like I was doing. If you come into my life and show me a new path. And I suppose, like from that, you know, I felt calm, I felt peace after I'd spoken that to God, and then I felt the peace over myself. And I started going to Bible school and stuff like that while I was in prison. I was already attending the chaplain. I got involved within the chaplain and started doing the Bible course. I would also started my recovery off it within prison. So I kind of all started off from in there, from that time when I don't know, it was as if a light switched on in me. Because like before, I always felt like I wasn't good enough, you know, I wouldn't be able, I had that fear of what would life be like without substances, because I'd been on that, you know, cycle for that long. I didn't know what life would look like without the substances. You know, I felt like I lost my identity. I didn't know where I was anymore. I didn't know where my purpose was in life. or you know, where I was going. And I had to start somewhere, and it was like everything that I had tried, it just did not work. And you know, since I asked God to come into my life, and He has showed me a path, and that's that's one of my songs. That's why it's one of my favourite songs, Waymaker, Miracle Worker, because that's what He's done for me. You know, He's picked my stuff up and He's turned it around. You know, so I went through, upon my release in 2022, when I come out of prison. I went into Alpha House Rehab, which is over in Halifax, and I just did everything that was required of me. You know, I went through my step work, I got service. I look at service as really important when you're doing something, because for me, I had jobs and I had this and that, but I never took that responsibility. So I always think of like taking on service for me, you know, when I was early on in my recovery, that was also something. So I always call it, you know, I've got my faith, but I've also got the action that I need to put in as well. So, you know, I had to put action alongside what I was asking for. I can't just ask for it and, you know, it was all going to happen and that was going to be that. You know, that'd be way too easy. So, you know, I think putting the action into your recovery. And when I talk about service, I think, you know, that when I look back, that was the start of something of me taking responsibility, and also me taking responsibility for my own recovery. You know, because that's like, in a way, I'd say it as a voluntary work, as doing, you know, it's something I know that I need to get there, that starts me off as having a purpose. So, yeah, I've gone through all the Alpha House recovery. As I was doing that, I got into like a level, a stage 2 of their recovery program. I started volunteering. I met my friend Dave at a game of football, and I started volunteering with the homeless pastors. So that, I think, yeah, I started volunteering with them. I was also going to college. I got 2 diplomas out of college through going there, which were a big thing for me. I actually even had a fear of going to college because, like, I'd never done well at school. You know, I was always in trouble. Going to college, I was like, how's this going to work out? I had fear of if I was going to get the grades or not. And, you know, I ended up coming out with a distinction out of college. So it kind of, yeah, each little milestone, the little things that I did and that worked out, it gave me more and more of a confidence and a faith that things, you know, were going to work out. Because, you know, I had faith in God, but I also needed to have faith in myself as well, that I could do this stuff. You know, and it showed me that as things was working out, and I think consistency as well for me was key. You know, I was consistent in my drug use, but I'd never been consistent in life. You know, I'd make promises that actually I couldn't really deliver. You know, because the drugs always took me back out of the door. So, you know, when I went into recovery, you know, I put my ears back, I listened, and I did everything that was required of me. And as I went through college and I started meeting new friends and new people, because I'm originally here from Leeds, but I could not get my recovery in Leeds. There's no way that I would get my recovery in Leeds. I used to do a thing where I'd say in my head, you know, I'm off to my friend's house, you know, I'd have parts where I'd be clean, and I'd say to my friend, I'll just go see so-and-so, we'll just have a coffee. I'd be sat there, you know, before half an hour had even passed, I'd say, you're ringing so-and-so up, you know, and that's how it worked out every time. You know, so I could never get my recovery in Leeds. You know, I just knew that it wouldn't happen, so I had to go out of Leeds to get my recovery. And I started building new friends, you know, around where I was. You know, my support network now that I've got is massive, people who I can speak to. And it also built me a trust. You know, I never had trust with people who I was kind of using with, because, you know, the only thing we really had in common was the substance. You know, there weren't really any friendships there, or, you know, because they cared about me, so that we could use together. So yeah, I mean, going through my journey, I started off, I'll go back again, so you know, I went through college, and as I was doing that, I was volunteering. And like, I've just been consistent with everything, like throughout my recovery. I think I stayed in the rehab, I think it was like 16 to 18 months, then I went into a move on property. Something quite pivotal happened in my, you know, it was quite a big thing that happened in my recovery. Last year, quite early on, I lost my mum, and you know that was a thing I found that when I lost my mum, it hurt me a lot, and that was a thing that I could relapse on the back of. My emotions were a lot of it, you know. I just wanted to blank things out. As I got older, you know, I started taking them because I enjoyed them in a way, and it changed the way that I feel. But as I got older, I was taking them to blank things out. Now, when this happened in 2024, early last year, I really did not know how to feel. You know, it absolutely broke me when my mum passed. But what I did is I put my faith in God again. I prayed about it. I carried on praying, and you know, I got through it because there was only two ways that were going to go. I was either going to go back into the addiction, which I knew that had never worked in my life. I'd been through all them years of going through that stuff, and I never found the answer in the substance or in the drink. You know, and like I say, it was a really hard time, but I got through it. And what I've always found in my recovery, that when I get through things, I take strength from them, because it's like it's the character building within inside me as well. And I think we're always doing, you know, we're always character building within inside ourselves. You know, we get through things, you'll get through trials and tribulations in life. And what we find is later on, you know, that we take strength from that. So for me, it was started off as the small things that I'd get through, you know, and if I got through lots, you know, them small things, and I'd take strength from that, and that built and built. Because me inside, I was lost, I was broken, and I didn't know myself, and I had to learn everything about myself, the way that I think, feel, everything like that. And you know, what triggers me to going back to using drugs. And that was one of the things that triggered me. But, you know, me not going back and using the drugs, it can seem really hard at the time, you know, when you feel like I was in a prison cell, I was lost, broken, didn't have nothing, you know, I didn't have no one around me, but that's what I call tough love, and sometimes that's what people show you, tough love, so you'll change. But I really didn't know a way out, and that's why I asked God to come into my life. Because I was that desperate, I just did not know a way out at all. And you know, he showed me the way out. You know, and I'm on a path, and I just continue to follow for what God's showing me. But today, what I have done through coming through all that program, and you know, I've learned a lot about myself coming through that. I'm able to also help others out of addiction now. You know, I went through college and everything like that. Now I've gone through college, you know, I've been training for a long time with homeless pastors. I got given a paid role last year with the homeless pastors. I've been working with them for about 2 years now. You know, but my paid role came in last year, and it's given me a purpose. You know, so it was quite funny how I met Dave. So we met at a game of football while I was in recovery, and I always said to my mum as well that I wanted to help people get out of situations that I was in. So I always feel like I was meant to meet Dave, you know, because he was setting this up, and he was going through, you know, the work of helping people who was on the streets, trapped in addiction, homelessness and mental health. Because for me, that was me. You know, I slept on town hall steps when I've been homeless, but you know, I'd say to anybody, you know, it don't matter how far you think you are, and there's no hope, there is hope. You can't change. I was stuck in that for 21 years, and if I can manage to get out of it, then anybody can. You know, whatever way you find for you. But I definitely say to be, you know, seeking support around getting that. Sometimes it doesn't always come straight away. You know, I had to literally shout, you know, from rooftops basically, I need this, I want this, and I had to fight for my recovery as well. You know, no one was turning around to me and going, "Oh, I can get you into a rehab," or anything like that. I just went round on this cycle, like it was as if I had my eyes closed. You know, but I managed to come out of that, and today I work on the streets, helping people within my job role, helping people off of the streets, getting them into rehabs. I also run a 12-step life recovery Jesus program. You know, so it's helping people to connect together and making them feel like they belong. You know, because I never felt like I belonged. The only people who I belonged to was people who was in the problem. You know, once I got in that solution, you know, and I started seeing that it worked for other people, you know, people that further on than me in the rehab process, you know, or just further on in their recovery. I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it as well. And I think it's also good to get ourselves around good people, support networks, you know, breaking that cycle of being stuck in that, because, you know, that's what I had to do, but I suppose I did it through you know, I asked God to come into my life through that, and, you know, since then, the journey's been amazing. There's loads more that I could share, but we haven't got time, so I'll leave it there.